You can access the entire episode now on our website, forbiddenknowledge.news, Rokfin, Rumble, and all podcast platforms. Things that we're working with, whether it's scientific or medical or alchemical, things that we're creating ourselves, our state of mind, our state of emotion is extremely important to be a good one whenever we're working with this, because we can release some of these energies, or like you say, entities, into the product that we are trying to create. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's, I think that if there's just like one really important thing that I could impart onto people, it's that thing. Like, and all of us actually have experience with this. We just don't like tie it into everything else. We're just not putting two and two together. Like when you were sick, Mom may have made you some chicken soup. And when she did that, she wasn't just like completely stressed and pissed and whatever else. She's thinking about your wellness and trying to get you. It's like it's a sacrifice of love that is going into that chicken soup. Now, whether the chicken itself was sourced really well or can cause cellular inflammation or whatever else takes background. That's not the precedent here, because it's the energy that went into the thing that is actually healing us on some degree, regardless of the physical materials that actually go into it. Because again, we're multidimensional beings. We have a spiritual body, we have this causal body, we have an astral body that is kind of composed of the mental and the emotional. And then we have an etheric body, which is purely electromagnetic interface. It's a piezoelectric interface that exists throughout our entire fascia inside of our network, our physiological network. And then we have a physical body that is just, atoms and molecules and tissues and cells and so on, and so, organs and so on and so forth. And physical stuff affects the physical body. Emotional stuff affects the emotional portion of our astral body, and the thoughts affect the mental part of our astral body. The geometries, the crystallizations, the coherence, the cause and effect, those affect the causal plane, and the sense of oneness and our connection back to the source of all creation. However we want to conceive of that, there's no right or wrong way. There's myriad ways of looking and philosophizing about that, but our connection to that is what ties us back into spiritual well-being. And so when Mom is making these things, she has the emotional resonance of, God, I'd hate my baby to be sick, and the mental concept of, I need my baby to be well. And the physical, healing stuff that goes in it, all of your carrots that have carotenoids and beta carotene and stuff like that, and celery that has these things that reduce cellular inflammation, the bone broth that is from boiling the whole chicken down, if she wasn't just making it with chicken breast, maybe even the homemade noodles and the love that goes into that and all these other things. So it's approaching us on this multidimensional level. And so cooking and, kitchen witchery is oftentimes the way that I discuss and teach about that from kind of a more entertaining view these days. Those types of things are really critical because we have the ability to imbue things during the state of that boil, that flux, again, that material is going through. Same thing with making infusions and teas and whatever else. But when we engage in alchemy, we're not just eliciting a small change, we're eliciting a whole progressive series of changes so that the material that we started with is no longer even recognizable in its energetics or its capacity, because we've extracted the soul, the spirit, and the body of these materials and perfected each of those and then recombined it back together. So at its lowest sense, it is now an exalted form of what it initially was, and at its greatest potential, it is entirely transformed to such a degree that you can't even tell that it would have come from that initial material. So, yeah.
Now, going deeper into the materials that you're utilizing, you mentioned several times the spirit of this material. And the more collectively that we understand about the nature of reality, the more we understand that everything has a level of consciousness. Maybe you could give us some examples of that. I mean, it's pretty obvious with the animal kingdom, with humans, that there's consciousness there, but even with plants and minerals, is that right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, for instance, like you mentioned, with plants and animals, we can really tell that there is sentience there, and we would refer to that form of consciousness as the sulfur of the material, the soul of the material. And that soul really has two different grades or two different forms. There's one that's called the volatile sulfur, or volatile soul. And in modern metaphysics, this would kind of be referred to as the higher self. It is the aspect of us that perhaps exists in the subconscious and unconscious components that just gives us our talents and our interests. Like, why are you interested in the occult and in metaphysics and things like you may not necessarily have a conscious answer for that. It's just an inherent talent. It's an inherent interest that you have. And these are the things that are constantly guiding us, and they are oftentimes tied into the causal plane as the purpose of our existence. And we all have this higher aspect of us that if we're able to align our bodies and our lower sulfur, our fixed sulfur is what we call that, together and animate all of these things with our spiritual energy, our disciplines, our actions on the day-to-day, then we will be able to have that effect that we were designed to be able to have throughout the course of our lifetime. The fixed sulfur is more of like the color of our skin, the tone of our voice, the color of our hair and our eyes, the way that we dress, the way that we come across, the types of words that we use to express ourselves. See, these are not necessarily physical things, but they can be physical things. They're tied into our physicality, but they shape how people perceive us, how we perceive ourselves, and how we express ourselves. And for the most part, these things are largely conscious. And so we have these two different aspects of our soul that are constantly dynamically at play. And our emotions, the way that we express our emotions and things like that, all of that is kind of part of the soul resonance of a species. When we take a look at vegetable materials, we see that same thing, but just in a way that is not as relatable from the human experience as it is when we look at animals. Animals and humans share a lot of similarities in those ways. If we're hungry and people get in the way between us and our food, we might get hangry, right? We might get pissed, we might attack. That's a very animalistic type of behavior that carries over into the human realm. With plants, they look at things a whole lot differently, especially with trees. They're all about the sharing of resources and the benefit of the entirety of the plant kingdom as a whole that are living there. And they work so symbiotically with fungi and bacteria and archaea and these other different forms of microbiological life forms that they're much more universally tied in. We could argue that they have a greater deal of spirit within them as a result of that. And of course, as you know, they're taking our exhalations of carbon dioxide and carbon-based things, and they're constantly breathing that in and transforming it back into oxygen. They're literally spiriting the entire earth for us, trees are. And so with trees especially, we can see that they have very particular signatures in their fixed sulfur, like what differentiates an oak tree from a hawthorn tree. We can look at the bark, we can look at the leaves and their shape, we can look at how tall they grow, what types of fruits that they might bear, so on and so forth. And there are clearly differences there. So they too have a fixed sulfur, and they also have a volatile sulfur, which is to say like a purpose for their existence. And their purpose is totally different too. An oak tree is meant to be the pinnacle of the expression of healthy forests. Old and advanced forested lands will eventually be oaks primarily. There'll be oak, there'll be maple, there'll be hardwoods. Younger forests are going to have much softer wood trees that are not so much at the pinnacle, but they're still very important, but they're like evergreen trees like pines and cedars and junipers and things like that. And so you can see that there's an evolution of the entire ecology from a forestry type of perspective. And as that whole landmass, that whole forested area kind of goes through its evolutions, eventually its crowning aspect will be the oaks. And oaks are amazing because they actually attract lightning to them, and they utilize that lightning that strikes them. They don't get too terribly damaged. They're able to put all of that electricity into the ground in order to be able to animate the ground and to provide nitrogen and health.